Hello, this is Jason Jones, and I want to walk you through how we determine the new stroke allocation to go with the new scorecards in 2024. You may ask, who determines the rating, slope, and stroke allocation on a golf course? The top section of this page shows you the back of our current scorecard where the rating and slope can be found, and the bottom section shows how the strokes are allocated across the different holes in the course. The USGA does this course rating and slope. We're supposed to get it rated every 10 years, and the last time we had it rated was in 2017. Many think that the USGA also does the stroke allocation on the course, which is not the case. They do not do that. So then who does? Well, the handicap committee is responsible for doing the stroke allocation on the course. At Cattail, our handicap committee is a subcommittee of the golf committee. The other thing worth noting is that the stroke allocation process guidelines were changed when the World Handicap System was put in place. Prior to this, there was a bigger emphasis put on the differential between a scratch golfer and a bogey golfer. You can still use some of those concepts, but it relaxed it a little bit and changed the process to make it a little bit easier to implement. So we'll start to dive into the stroke allocation process. The first thing you must do is divide the course into 6 triads. You may ask, what is a triad? It's simply a grouping of 3 holes. So the first 3 holes in the course would be the first triad, and then holes 4 through 6 is the second triad, so forth, so on. Then you also need to assess the difficulty of each hole. So we use various pieces of information. One, we use our current scorecard as a starting point. We also gather the course rating data from the USGA from the last time they rated the course. And most importantly, we looked at Golf Genius, our tournament data for 2022 and 2023. The other thing worth noting is that the USGA recommends that the front 9 get the odd strokes and the back 9 get the even strokes. That is not how we currently have it on our scorecard. And it's worth noting the USGA says that if the back 9 is significantly more difficult than the front 9, you can switch this. So let's look at the data. In the course rating data, the front 9 is actually 2 strokes easier than the back. In our tournament data over the last 2 years, it's only 1 stroke different. However, we felt it was still appropriate to keep the current scorecards. We're not going with that general guideline, and we're going to say the front 9 gets the even strokes and the back 9 gets the odd strokes, which is consistent with our current scorecard. So you take all that, apply the stroke allocation process, and what do you get? You get a new scorecard. And here's the new scorecard. But wait, we need to go through a lot more information so you understand how the strokes are allocated this year. So here's some more guidelines. The biggest emphasis in the new process is to evenly allocate strokes over the entire 18 holes. So what they really would like to do, the ideal situation is to assign the lowest indexed hole on each 9 in the middle triad. But if that middle triad doesn't have one of the lowest 6 holes relative to par, then you can move it to either the other thirds. The second lowest hole would then ideally go into either the first or third triad, and then the third would go in the last remaining one. But the goal is to spread out those 3 hardest holes in each 9 across each of the triads. You also want to avoid low stroke indexes on consecutive holes, and try to avoid low stroke index holes at the beginning or end of a 9. Just remember, these are guidelines and are not firm rules. So here's an example of the data we accumulated. We're going to see this pop up throughout the presentation, but I just want to walk you through what some of this stuff is. The course rating rank that was determined from the course rating data that we got. And the 2022 and 2023 information here, that came from the 2022 and 2023 Golf Genius tournament data. And this is the rankings, and what do we mean by rankings? 1 equals the hardest, 18 is the easiest. And here's all the data across all the holes. I'm not going to leave this up on the screen. We're going to go through more details later. So let's start with allocation on the front 9. Here's our front 9 and the current stroke allocation across those holes. We made one key decision to start, that we wanted to assign the easiest holes to the par 3s. The reason here is we did not want to have too many strokes given on a par 3. And that's the way our current scorecard is also. So by doing that, that makes hole 3 and hole 8 considered an easy hole. And then we looked at the data, and based on the data, 8 is easier than 3. And so we ended up keeping the same stroke index that they had currently, 18 and 16 respectively. So then that leaves the middle triad. So which one's the easiest there? Between 4, 5, and 6, I think common knowledge would tell you 4, and the data supports that. So then the first triad, hey, everyone knows 1's the hardest hole, data supports it. Middle triad, everyone knows 5's the hardest hole, the data supports it. And the same thing in the last triad between 7 and 9, 7's the hardest hole. So then how do you determine which of those gets the number 2 handicap? Well, here's a reminder from the guidelines. Apply the lowest stroke index hole in the middle triad. So if you look at the data, 1 and 5 are pretty close, but we went with the guideline here because 5 is smack dab in the middle. It's in the middle triad, and it's also in the middle of that triad. So we gave the tiebreaker there, and we gave it the 2 handicap. The other guideline to point out is you want to avoid a low stroke index hole at the beginning or end of a 9. So clearly hole number 1 is harder than number 7. But in trying to adhere to this guideline, we decided to make hole number 7 the number 4 and hole number 1 this number 6. I know a lot of people have complained in the past that 1 was the 12 handicap. We all know it's a hard hole, and now it's getting its respect. So then that leaves us with only 3 holes left to go, 2, 6, and 9. And you look at the data, 6 is clearly the hardest out of the 3. So it gets the number 8. And then 2 is the next hardest. It gets the 10. And lastly, hole 9 gets the 12 handicap. So there's your front 9. So now we move to the back 9. Remember, the key decision we made is that par 3s would be assigned the easiest holes. This is where we took a second, and if there's ever a par 3 on our course that we shouldn't make in the bottom 4, it's hole number 13. And the data supports it. It's a hard hole. But again, we really decided we wanted to minimize the amount of strokes that were given on a par 3, so we stuck with the current decision that they're both considered quote-unquote easy, and they get the 17 and 15 handicap, which is what they have today. So now we move to what are the 3 hardest holes in their respective triad. I think everyone would pretty easily tell you it's 11, 14, and 17, and the data supports it. So now we have to assign the strokes across those 3. So remember the guideline, the 2 guidelines we called out earlier. You want to apply the lowest stroke index in the middle triad. And you want to avoid the low stroke index hole at the beginning or end of a 9. Now remember, these are guidelines. So if you just followed this guideline, it would lead you to believe that 14 should be the number 1 handicap. When we took a step back and looked at that, that just didn't feel right for our course. 17 is by far the hardest hole in the course. And so we decided to go with the number 1 handicap going to number 17. Now it's not at the very end of the triad. It's, it is the second to last hole, but that's what we decided to do. And then according to the data, 11's the number 3 handicap. And also we felt like it was good to space it out, get it a little bit, the number 3 handicap a little bit farther away from the number 1. So we went with 11 as the number 3, and that left 14 as the number 5. So now we have 4 holes remaining, 10, 12, 15, and 18. 18, it's the last hole. It's currently the 13 handicap. And of these 4 holes, it's the easiest. So this is another spot that we deviated from the guidelines. We assigned 2 easy holes in the last triad. So remember, we do feel 18 is an easy hole. It also balances out the fact that we made 17 the number 1 handicap. So we assigned it to 13, consistent with what it is today. And then what that meant is we had to put 2 mediums into another triad, We put that in the first triad. So that led us to another difficult discussion. How do you compare 10 and 12? According to the data, 10 is clearly a harder hole than 12. However, the tee shot on 10 is more straightforward. 12 has a decent amount of force carry for some, and the tee shots could get lost both left and right. 12 is also currently the number one handicap. We gave a little slight consideration to not wanting too low of a handicap on the first hole of the back nine, and therefore we thought it was better balanced to make 12 a lower handicap than 10. So 12 gets the 7 handicap, 10 gets the 9 handicap, and that leaves 15 with the 11 handicap. And that's your men's stroke allocation for 2024. Now we also did the same process for the women. Same general process for women. Here's the results. I'm not going to walk you through the details. A couple things to keep in mind. There is less data for the women. Less data in the course rating procedure. They don't have a lot of tournaments compared to the men. So instead what we did is we used the results from the 18-hole women's league. So because there's a little bit less data, it was a little bit more subjective, but we did consult with the ladies that are on the golf committee to decide on the ending stroke allocations. A couple other things just to note, in case you're curious, why is 17 so easy for the ladies? Well, keep in mind, 12 is a par 4 for the women, and 17 is a par 5 for the women. And with that, here is the final result and our final scorecard for 2024. I hope you enjoy, and if you have any questions, feel free to seek me out.